Ridge. Welcome to another edition of After Hours. This week, rather than kind of focusing back on what we've just finished, which was a really good topic being covered by my son John Hicks as he talked about persecution, we're going to look forward in this After Hours. We're going to talk about the series that's coming up because there's a lot of things we're going to be doing in this series. The series is called The Coming King, and we're going to be looking at 7 different titles that are given in the book of Isaiah for the Messiah who's going to come. And these different titles include the wisdom, the Lord, which is the name Yahweh, or pronounced usually when we read it as Adonai, the root of Jesse, the key of David, the dayspring, the King of the nations, and Emmanuel. And these 7 titles were used at various places in the book of Isaiah. They all reference back to the Messiah and what he was going to come and do. And they're rich titles which are worthy of deep meditation by us, and we can meditate on them on at least 4 different levels, which we're going to try and do throughout the series, and I encourage you to be doing as well. First, Isaiah developed each of these themes throughout his book. He doesn't just usually mention them once, he'll bring them back and talk about them in different places, and they all even kind of interact with one another. So there's a development and a richness in the book of Isaiah. Secondly, they are picked up in the New Testament, and it specifically relates these ideas to Christ. You can think of ways that Christ is referred to as the wisdom of God, for example, or being related to Jesse and David and being the light, and all of these kinds of things, which we will develop as well. Thirdly, the church, reflecting on Isaiah and also what the New Testament had to say, specifically took these 7 and meditated on them and used them as a tool as the church each year meditated on the coming of Christ. So during the early church, they created 7 hymns around these 7 titles, and they were done in Latin. They became Latin hymns to Christ. We know that they go back at least to the 7th century in the church, but they may even be earlier than that. They may be as early as like 500. But they were used by the church from that time forward all the way through the Middle Ages. And by the time of the Middle Ages, they were often used in the week leading up to Christmas Eve. Each day, one of these songs would be sung. They became known as the O antiphons because they were titled, for example, in English, we would call it O Wisdom, or O Lord, or O Root of Jesse. In Latin, the titles were like O Sapientia, or O Clavis, which is key. They would use these different titles for Jesus, and they were referred to as antiphons because each night they would sing one. So for example, when they would sing the O Sapientia to O Wisdom, they would then sing the Magnificat, which is Mary's song of praise when she learned that she was going to be the mother of the Messiah and that Jesus was going to come through her. She sang the Magnificat. So they would sing one of these O antiphons, these titles. They would then have the words of Mary referencing Jesus coming, and then they would sing the O antiphon again, which is why it was called an antiphon. It was a song on each side of this Magnificat. And so it became part of the church's preparation for the coming of Christ each year. And they reflected upon these titles for Christ and how it related to further biblical teaching regarding Christ. So that is a third rich layer. And then we're going to have a 4th layer added to this, which is an Anglican priest named Malcolm Guite, who is a really great poet. He's been recognized as a great living English poet. He has written a sonnet about each of these O antiphons. So for O Sapientia, or O Wisdom, he's written a sonnet called O Wisdom that reflects on it. And it goes back and it certainly looks at Isaiah and the teaching in Scripture and even how the church had reflected upon these antiphons, but then also he relates them to our own current day. And this is really, really important for us as we think about doing this, because that shows us how we're always to really wrestle through and meditate on Scripture. Paul said we should let the Word dwell in us richly, which means we need to look at how Isaiah used it and developed it, how the rest of Scripture develops it, how God has spoken to the church throughout church history, and then even how it relates to our own day. And so we're going to do this, and there'll be a bunch of ways you can walk through this and meditate on these things with us. Each Sunday we'll be taking one of the O antiphons And we will be focusing on it all the way up through Christmas Eve. And that focus will include not only the teaching on that particular aspect, but our choir that sings around Christmas time each year is actually going to start early this year, and they'll be singing each week that old Latin hymn translated into English so that we can hear and respond to that. We'll also be referencing these poems by Malcolm Guite. All of this will be included in the devotional material. And of course, all of these were culminated in the great hymn, O Come, Emmanuel, Emmanuel being the last of them. And so we'll also have an opportunity to kind of meditate on that hymn as well. All of this will be in our devotional guides. We'll be doing it on Sundays. It'll lead us not only before Advent, but as we move into Advent and heading towards Christmas Eve, to really focus on who Jesus is, this coming King, how great he is, and how great is the salvation that he's given to us. So I want to encourage you to take the time to be listening each Sunday as we're doing this, and then reading through the devotional and discussion guide and thinking through on all these deep levels. The more we do that, the more we will learn, because the truth that God has spoken to us, and our God is no thin thing that you can cover just once. That the truth of God is like a beautiful diamond, that the more you turn it, the more you see, the more you think and meditate, the more that is uncovered and the more that it shapes us. So we're going to go on this journey for 7 weeks. I hope it'll be a blessing to you and give you great encouragement and also an even greater desire for the King who came to save us and the King who is going to come again to complete our salvation. I hope you have a great week, and I look forward to worshiping together this weekend. God bless.